Hi, my name is Tony McLaughlin, and we are talking payments with Dr. Brad Pragnell. Brad, hi, how's it going? If there's anyone that I know who is an international man of mystery in the payment space, it's you because you've got so many, you've got fingers in so many different initiatives, and you've been involved all around the world in the development of instant payments and open banking. So, Brad, it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thanks a lot, Tony. Very glad to be on the line here with you.
And Brad, tell us a little bit about your extensive experience in the payment space and what kind of engagements you're working on at the moment.
Sure. Thanks, Tony. Look, I started in payments back in 2008, where I joined APCA, the Australian Payments Clearing Association, had 8 glorious years there. And I think the highlight of that was the new payments platform. So I was lucky enough to head up the policy unit that led to the development of the new payments platform, and which has been in operation for about 2 years now. And it's been a great initiative. And I think that really, for me, gave me the bug and got me really excited about instant payment, real-time payments. And since then, I've really focused my efforts since then. I've been consulting for about 3 years now, consulting primarily with Payments Canada around the real-time rail, their new real-time initiative. I've also consulted in Pakistan on the micropayments gateway, which was funded, partially funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So yeah, I've really found the whole instant payments space really exciting, and starting to get excited about other areas like open banking and digital identity. But that's really where I got the bug, was with APCA, with NPP.
So let's talk about that a little bit. How has the implementation of NPP in Australia gone, and what kind of uptake are you seeing at the moment?
Look, it's gone extremely well. I think that there was, when we went through the original sort of ideation of it, there was always a lot of questions about, well, is there demand? Is there a need? We've seen significant growth over the past 2.5 years. So I'm pretty sure we're looking at well over 1 million transactions a day happening in Australia at the moment. So, I mean, the numbers are really significant. We're really seeing double-digit growth with NPP. We're seeing it actually even in the COVID environment, it being used a lot more. It's being used, for instance, in the point of sale space,
Mhm.
where you might have smaller merchants who don't have card, don't acquire cards, or don't accept cards, and so they're taking NPP payments. Other people, tradespeople, things like that. So we're really seeing a significant take up of that. Yeah, and it's been great. And I think people have also recognized NPP is really sort of trying to do new things.
Mhm.
They've announced about a month or so ago the new mandated payment service, so where they would effectively be holding consents centrally, which would facilitate things like effectively, request to pay direct debit type payments. So again, and facilitate open banking as well too. So, and third-party initiation. So really exciting things happening here in Australia at the moment.
So
And
these
like I
are
said,
the
it was great to be part of that.
Yeah, this is the development then of the kind of so-called overlay services which fit on
Yep.
top of the core rail. And I wonder, as you moved from your experience in Australia into working with Payments Canada, what were the lessons learned that you took into that Canadian discussion from the NPP experience?
Well, I think the main thing that I took in, and again, all the comments I'm making here are personal comments. They're not comments for any of my former employers or current clients or anything like that. They're my views, personal views. Look, I think the main thing that I brought in from NPP was the importance of working with the key stakeholders, with financial institutions in the instance of NPP, and with the central bank. It was the RBA in Australia, and really getting them aligned, at least around the vision. And that was really important. And working through a lot of the soft stuff. I think quite often when you get into these discussions around instant to real-time payment systems, you really get into a lot of the technology and the operational challenges associated with that. And that's true, but there are a lot of design choices associated with real-time systems. And so the governance is really important. How do you make decisions? How do you decide whether or not it's only going to be credit transfer, whether or not there's going to be an alias database in the center, which messaging standard are you going to use? I mean, these are really important decisions, and I think industry needs an effective way of landing on those decisions and making sure that those decisions stick. So I think that's sort of the main thing I brought to Canada, is really thinking hard about those issues.
Yeah, and what is the current status of the project in Canada? What's the current environment look like for payments, and what are the plans to develop new services?
Look, I think Canada is really a ripe environment for these kinds of new initiatives. So it's a really well developed market, obviously, highly banked, and a large uptake in terms of obviously things like Interac transfers, which have operated as a kind of a P2P service that offers some of the features of a real-time system. So Canadians are already adopting and using a lot of those initiatives. I think with Canada, part of what we're trying to do is to just add that additional service on top of what Canadians already have. So, I mean, they're already well served, but again, I think a new real-time system really does add to the mix, does provide for Canadians to move away from things like checks. So Canadians are very heavily dependent, much like their American counterparts, they're still heavily check dependent. And I think that a new real-time system, particularly with ISO 20022 messaging, does allow for, in not just the P2P, but in the business payment space, to step away from the reliance of checks. I think one last thing about Canada is government is really interested in this as well too. I think they're very interested in how we can move away from paper-based payments and more towards electronic payments. They've expressed interest in that quite recently.
And one of the other interesting features of Canada is it's moving quite quickly in terms of building out digital ID infrastructure also. So has that played into the developments in the payment space?
Yeah, look, I think in Canada, a lot of what we're trying to do is to work out how do we knit together, in a sense, the three main pillars, I guess, of this, real-time, digital ID, and open banking. So they're all in play in Canada at the moment, and obviously we're trying to build on what we've currently done and do it in a way that meets the needs of the Canadian ecosystem. But I think, like every other environment, it's really that triumvirate of three initiatives, of the three-legged stool. How do you get those right?
And
if you get them right, then you open up, a world of opportunity, really, I think.
Absolutely, because I guess in open banking, in fact, in any payment system, one of the critical points is how do you grant your consent to the transaction taking place? This issue of strong customer authentication. And you talked before about in Australia there being a kind of mandate or consent database, which goes beyond just saying, yes, I want to make this payment, but perhaps into, yes, I will make a series of payments, maybe even variable payments. So that kind of, in my mind, starts to boil down into the digital identity space. How do I verify that consent?
Yeah. Look, I agree. And I think we're starting to see, with the intersection between real-time, open banking, digital ID, the need to create, and I'll just reflect on the Canadian or the Australian environment here, the need to create other types of functionality that industry can tap into. So if they are able to take advantage of a real-time system, or an open banking environment, then they might need to create new and other types of functionality to enable that to work efficiently and effectively. So I think that's really what I'm seeing a lot of here in Australia. Absolutely. I think a lot of people are taking interest in that overall, for sure.
And let's continue our whirlwind tour to Pakistan. So, I guess, for people in the payment space, one of the standout developments in the past decade or so has been the development of the India stack, culminating in UPI. And the Indian example, I think, is a massive transformation and an inspiration in terms of delivering a completely new infrastructure. And interestingly enough, the whole thing sits on top of that base layer of digital identity provided by the Aadhaar system. What's the current situation in Pakistan, and what is the micropayments gateway that's being developed there?
Right. Look, I think Pakistan has obviously some common features in terms of its level of economic development and level of banked population and so forth that you'd obviously see in India. So there's obviously some common sort of features that you would see there. It is a different market. It's a very large and complex market in Pakistan. Again, I think micropayments gateway that I've been involved with is part of trying to create that real-time payments functionality. There's obviously a lot of interest in digital ID as well. There's similar initiatives that are happening in Pakistan as well too. I think on open banking, they're probably a little bit further along, maybe not as developed along that path, but I think in Pakistan, definitely there's the potential is just transformative, like you've seen in India as well too, just the ability to just create a toolkit that allows for innovation and competition, and just you'll see it hockey stick. I think that's sort of what they're hoping for.
Yes.
Been making great progress, but now, obviously COVID is kind of obviously having a bit of an impact globally. So we'll see where things end up.
Well, indeed. I mean, the Indian example has seen hundreds of millions of people being brought into the banking system, and a massive shift from cash to digital. So another question I want to ask you in general is the adoption of digital payments. It seems that there's this narrative out there about everything digital, being accelerated by 3 years as a result of the crisis. Yeah. From a policy perspective, what other policy responses, or what policy responses do you see taking place as a result of the crisis? And in particular, I'd like to ask you about central bank digital currencies. Do you think that the crisis will lead to the development necessarily of central bank digital currencies? And if so, why?
Look, I think what we're seeing globally, and again, this is a horrible, gross oversimplification. Governments and central banks are obviously responding with helicopter money in a lot of instances to deal with the economic impact of COVID. So a lot of interest in leveraging what already exists and maybe fast tracking where they can, things that are very close to being completed. So obviously where there are real-time rails available, where there are digital identity schemes available, they've been trying to access those and leverage those as effectively as they can. So I do think that in terms of the real time, in terms of sort of infrastructure development, in terms of identity, you are seeing a real focus from policymakers on those areas. I think on things like open banking or central bank digital currencies, I'm curious to see whether or not we might see some of those nice to haves, at least in the minds of policymakers, as opposed to must haves, taking a little bit of a backseat. We've seen in a few jurisdictions where governments have announced delays to implementation of open banking. So Canada, for example, there's been an announcement around a delay of open banking. So I know that they're pushing things out a little bit. So I think we're going to see some of that slow down. Central bank digital currencies as well. I think we could see a little bit of a slowdown, at least in the short term. It could pick up. But again, I think people are kind of focused on the here and now rather than on the innovation and competition aspect.
Yeah. And, finally, I'd like to ask you, given all your experience now in different jurisdictions, you must see some very common themes. Obviously, every country is very different. The stakeholders are very different. But, countries thinking about the implementation of that triumvirate, the open banking, digital ID, and open banking, are you able to, beyond managing the stakeholders effectively and getting the governance right, but are you able to talk about some of the best practices that you've seen, or is it too early to kind of see what the blueprint is? There a blueprint for best practice to implement in this triumvirate?
Good question. Look, I'm not sure if the blueprint's quite there. I think in terms of real-time instant payments, I think you see a relatively mature market now. I think that we've kind of worked out what works and what doesn't work. So I think there's been enough to really sort through that. I think digital ID and open banking, we're still learning. I've been involved with an organization called Emerging Payments Association of Asia, and we did a report on open banking that we released back in February of this year, and open banking in the Asia Pacific, and we found a lot of diversity. So industry participants and central banks and regulators were all kind of experimenting with different flavors of open banking, and I think that's fine. There's a period of experimentation you have to go through, but eventually you need to settle down and kind of decide how you're going to do this. So we're still a ways off. So I think the best practice around real-time payments is really around trying to keep it. I think keeping it simple is important. I know that sounds a little bit kind of cliche, but really focusing on real-time credit transfers, agreeing on the messaging standard quickly, deciding soon up front whether or not you're going to have an alias database inside or outside of it. Make those design decisions quickly up front, and then move into the implementation and bringing on board service providers and integrating financial institutions. Like, you don't want to spend too long debating those design decisions. You want to land on those pretty quickly and get to actually implementing the thing.
Yeah, great. Hey, Brad, got one and finally type question, slightly more lighthearted, which is, we're living in this almost like dreamlike state at the moment where lots of things are suspended. Very international people like yourself can't travel, but are there things from this current enforced lifestyle that you will carry on into normal life if we ever get back to normal life?
Good question. Look, I think it makes you think a little bit about finding that balance between home and family. I think it's very important. I mean, when you're going into an office every day, it's easier. I guess technology has blurred that, but when you're at home and you're forced at home, you really need to think about finding that balance. So I think that's something that I'm really reflecting on quite a bit, is what is that right balance between home and family. So look, I think it's been an interesting period. I think we've had to kind of reflect on some things, and I hope some of the lessons and learnings around the importance of frontline workers, on community, on things like that, on shared responsibility. I hope some of those things carry on, into the post-COVID environment.
Yeah, I guess it's been a period of enforced mindfulness, and
Sure.
You're quite right. We have to think very much about some of the, lowliest paid people in society carrying the biggest burden, actually. So lots of stuff to reflect on.
Exactly.
But Brad, it's awesome to talk to you as always. I, follow your work with massive interest, because you're, taking the seeds of best practice from place to place. So your reflections are very valuable. So thanks for spending the time today. Keep well, keep safe, and we'll speak soon.
Thank you very much, Tony. Really appreciate the time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Brad. Very much appreciate it. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.